Hi, my name's Kevin. I work for GridSpace. I'm here with Anthony Scuderi, co-founder, to talk about trends in 2024 to look out for in AI. Whoa, facial tracking. So I guess my first question is just, so a year ago, ChatGPT came out and kind of large language models have been utilized for all kinds of stuff. We had like a really crazy year in AI. Given that now your entire internet experience is, like, you encounter generative AI everywhere you go on the internet and even a lot of places outside of it, how does that set the stage for 2024?
Yeah, interesting question, because GPT and BERT and these other large transformer-based language models at this point are coming on 5+ years old, and we have been seeing pretty continual year after year progress on image generation models and audio generation models for about 8 or 9 years since a lot of the current wave of deep learning work started. But last year, I think, between broader adoption of some of the image generation and audio generation models like DALL-E and Midjourney, as well as obviously ChatGPT, there's a lot more awareness about the space. And I also think that there's been a little bit of a realignment in terms of, in particular, where some of the bigger tech companies are focusing their effort in terms of their model work. So I think that how that impacts 2024 is sort of 2023, everyone was just in a frenzy to see how they could apply, especially big language models like GPT 3.5 or other ones that were being worked on at some of the other tech companies. But now, a year later, I think people realize what really the industry has known for a long time is, one, machine learning models are really good at replicating the data that they were trained on and not very good at making sure that what they say is actually true or good or correct. They're just trying to generate something that's statistically likely to have been in the original data set. And so it's true that facts or the right tone for a situation are things that are more likely to occur than not. When you're predicting auto-regressively, one word after another, there's not that much there just with a raw language model to make something that useful beyond sounding real and being able to have a conversation with you and being able to process a lot of language, whether it's in a dialogue or a document. And so now, a year later, a lot of companies that, including GridSpace, that rely heavily on generative models, have made sure that a lot of their focus is on systems that are safe and can be trusted. For us, we operate on task-oriented dialogue systems, right? These are bots that need to actually do something useful, as opposed to ChatGPT, which is primarily you're just in the flow with a language model. Beyond some system prompting, there's not really much to make it do anything. We're obviously doing a lot of work with adding tools, adding plugins and stuff, but for the most part, it's still, you're just in the loop with a language model. For us, the language model is at the edge, right? It's, language generation, language understanding, document ingestion, query generation, these things that happen at the edge. But the core dialogue system is trying to keep things task-oriented, which is filling forms, routing conversations, routing calls, answering questions, and that stuff, it benefits tremendously from a powerful language model. For instance, if 10 years ago we wanted to parse out of a transcript an address that someone's giving over the phone, it's kind of hard sometimes to know where the address begins and ends with pre-deep learning language understanding, because in a street name, for instance, can be any word, right? So how do you write a rule for any word, right? You have to rely on context. Maybe the context is just someone asked for your address, and maybe they asked for it in a weird way, or in a way where the dialogue is could I get your address, home or work? What do you mean? Should you want my home address or my work address? You could have a very long preamble before then someone just says, Sunny Street or North Sunny Street, and it's just, that's a really hard language understanding question. This is one example of how, when you're trying to build a bot that actually solves tasks, a good language model really unblocks things. But when you say, okay, is it okay if I take all my prescribed medicine on the first day I was prescribed? Common sense is no, or in general, you probably have not given your health bot the permission to say that, but there's really nothing creating keeping the language model from saying yes, right?
Yeah.
Besides just that's maybe slightly less likely to be the token that follows, but framed in the right way or framed in the wrong way, truthfulness is not really a big part of generative models. If you look at like image generation, like the concept of truth doesn't really exist, right? You're just trying to make something that looks real. And something being real is a lot more aligned with what the model's trying to do, which is like real means likely to have occurred in the data set. Most of like ChatGPT was trained on like the common crawl, right? It's just the internet. And the internet is not full of just truth, I'm sorry to tell you. And so, and so there's not that much grounding, or the word that's commonly used is aligning it to just be truthful or safe or accurate. And that's engineering work and that's modeling work that happens external from just building a big language model, right?
Okay.
And so back to the question of what's the trend for 2024, there's different ways to solve that depending on what your model is supposed to do, right? And so if you're OpenAI and people, consumers are using your model to have conversations about who is the fifth president or whatever, a lot of that you can do through realigning the model to be more truthful, for adding multiple steps, things like a chain of thought, where the model at the decoding stage is being checked by either another language model output or a second pass. And you see this in like rendering all the time and other like traditional ways of generating images or text, where you might have a coarse pass and then a fine pass, and things like chain of thought and other variations on it. Have a lot of opportunity to look for errors or look for mismatches between source information, but even still, without grounding ChatGPT in like the internet or having it search through documents or have it like give it Wikipedia, there's nothing yet grounding it, and so that's probably work for them to do. For us, we've had Grace use documents for years, and so when she performs queries using a language model, and then retrieves documents and reads them using a language model, and then decides whether the answer is in the documents using a language model, you're breaking things up into steps where truthfulness is a lot easier to verify as a pure language task, right? You're just like, is the answer in this document? If so, turn it into what you say in response. You're breaking the task up into subtasks where truthfulness is a lot easier for a machine to verify without just really careful alignment.
I see. So, like, it sounds like last year the world was like given this like LLM model, and it could just like say stuff. But now, like, and it says a lot of things, but it's not really necessarily like saying, its goal isn't truth. Whereas in like, is it what you're saying is 2024 looks like a year where people are trying to like take that and try to make it actually useful and like do stuff?
Yeah, and it's tough because like, for us, we have this very limited, what's called a task-oriented spoken dialogue system. It's just supposed to solve things. It's entirely speech. So there's a lot of extra challenges that come from speech, but there's also a lot of nice restrictions that come from the fact that the purpose of the bot is not just to talk about anything. It's not just to generate poems and have conversations. It's meant to conversationally do something useful, which really restricts the task. But if you're like, let's say you're Google, right? And you're trying to launch Gemini, or before that Bard. And on one hand, they want to build a system that is an information retrieval system, maybe the successor of search. But on the other hand, like the expectations are set by ChatGPT to build systems that are essentially just your friend and can just chat with you. And those things are in very tight tension. You want it to be truthful about all the information on the internet, but you also want it to be not just conversational, but ideally you want it to be more impressive to consumers than ChatGPT, which people are already used to. And so for them and for other big tech companies, it puts them in a difficult place. I think it's probably one of the reasons that some of the tech companies like want to rely on third parties, like OpenAI, to build models for them or market their models, because it kind of provides a firewall between them and what those models do, which is, just generate text. Generate text that looks like it came from the internet, which is, not necessarily what people think that they're getting. Even you can have people talk to ChatGPT for 30 minutes without them building any more skepticism, right? Until they really start to probe it. skepticism about the truthfulness or the safety of the output. There's a lot of safety work that's gone on to just make it unlikely that these systems, are offensive or racist, which is an easier problem because one, that's not a normal modality of the system, whereas generating something that sounds truthful is. And also truth is a lot harder thing to define,
Well, it seems like some of the so applying tasks to language models, it seems like stuff like Grammarly probably does that, but that's is that considered low hanging fruit, correcting grammar and rephrasing things?
Yeah, that's actually a perfect example because so there's this concept in machine learning called the variance bias trade-off. And what it really just means is if I had this massive machine learning model and all it had to do was maybe predict if it's sunny out, if it's day or night, right? And it's just okay, if the sun's out, it is day. If the sun's not out, it's probably night. There's, edge cases where one of those is false, like if there's an eclipse or it's really cloudy. But for the most part, if you looked at an image or whatever, it's pretty obvious if it's sunny out that it's day. You could train this huge model on billions of images or billions of weather data, whatever, and it's just going to nail that problem because it's just such a narrow problem. It doesn't need billions of images. It probably doesn't need to be a machine learning model at all, to be honest.
Yeah.
And what that means is when your data is really narrowly defined, both the data being the pair, in this case, maybe the image and the day or night classification, that's one datum. When there's very low variance, meaning very little change between one image after the next, it's just dark images and light images, then you have this really narrow problem that the machine learning can do really simplistic things to address. By contrast, when you have to predict all the text in the internet or all the images that occur on the internet, that's a really broad problem. That's why these models have to be so large. And that's why also it's so hard to align them because you have this model that was trained to predict this very broad set of data, and then you want to align it to act like it's having a conversation. The majority of the data on the internet is not people having useful dialogues. It's posts, it's articles, it's information. It's much more broad, and it's also different types of text, fiction, nonfiction, Wikipedia entries, and so that stuff does not resemble what you're trying to have it do. Some of it does, but it does have lots of information about the world that allows it to reason about the world, and that's what makes these models so powerful. It has a lot of information about language and a lot of information about the world and how it's encoded in language, and so pre-training the model on the whole internet and then aligning it on this very narrow bit of data is one strategy for trying to get the variance dialed in. But really what they're doing is building a really large model and then getting that large model that was needed to deal with the high variance of the initial data, and then only at the end aligning it. It's much better to train on a smaller model on data that is more aligned from the beginning, but then you need actually more aligned data, which is the rarer data for folks like OpenAI. By contrast, we process millions of call center conversations. Those are much lower variance than just the text on the internet. It's a lot of the same stuff over and over and over again. And so for us, the models that we train different language models. By restricting the variance of these models, you make them smaller, make them faster, and make them more reliable. And you don't even necessarily need to do an alignment process potentially.
So, so if 2024 is the year that we see these models actually do stuff for us.
Yeah.
And it's pretty early in the year.
Yeah.
And if correcting your grammar or rephrasing a sentence to sound more a better way to phrase something is low-hanging fruit, what's the really hard stuff that we might see this year?